That was the week of June 25th, 2021. Some of you will know that Keith and I have stolen that music and imagery from a BBC show from the 1960s called That Was the Week. Hope there are no BBC lawyers watching this so they can sue us for billions of
Oh
dollars.
no, Andrew, you got to get it right. That was the week that was.
That was the week that was, to be exact. We have pickpocketed the imagery and the idea from the BBC, just as Steve Jobs stole the idea of the mouse from Xerox. And we're explicit and shameless about it. Back in the 60s, of course, in British politics, there was a prime minister from Keith's part of the woods, Yorkshire, called Harold Wilson. He famously said, "A week is a long time in politics." But a week isn't a long time in tech, Keith, because we're back to where we began. We're back this week to antitrust once again. And once again, you suggesting that free markets fix any issues of monopoly and we don't need regulation. So, very briefly, lay out what's happened this week to repeat basically the same debates that we had last week.
Well, yeah, but we're both learning from each other, so we won't exactly repeat the debates. But what happened this week? Well, a few things happened. The first is that Amazon announced that it is not going to support Google's Flock technology, which is their new tracking technology for Chrome. And partly in response to that, Google announced that it was delaying getting rid of cookies for another year beyond what was previously the case. So cookies are going to stay till the end of 2023 at least, which means Google is backpedaling against Apple and Amazon and everyone else who doesn't want them to do this tracking. Then the next thing that happened is Microsoft yesterday previewed Windows 11. And they announced that the App Store in Windows 11 is going to allow developers to bring their own billing system with them. And if they do that, Microsoft won't take any share of the revenue. It was a shot across the bows of Apple and its attempt to get 30% from the App Store.
Kind of a reverse of the old Jobs Gates tension.
Right. And then on top of that, a little browser called Brave, which is built on top of Chrome, ironically, announced the launch of its new search engine built into its browser to replace Google, which might sound like a smaller story, but big things often start small, and Brave is very popular. So we'll see.
I know Brave actually pretty well because their previous existence was Clicks. And I know the people at Burda Media and Paul Kalin and all those people. So they really believed in that. Before we get back to regulation, Keith, what's the story behind the reinvention of Clicks? Why'd they have to change the name? What's happened with that?
It really coincided with the rise of crypto and a pivot. So the Brave browser, instead of doing advertising, it lets websites build a wallet. And when you browse to the website, you can deposit crypto into the site wallet. So you pay for content via crypto in a micro chunked kind of a way. That's their core. And they therefore became very popular in the last few years because of crypto. And it's also encrypted and all
But why did Burda... I don't know if they jumped ship. Why did they change the name? Because Burda put a lot of money, my guess is over $100 million into Clicks. Kalin, one of his missions was to challenge Google and challenge the nature of what I think he saw as surveillance capitalism. So I don't understand why Burda have let go of Clicks and allow it to be reinvented.
I'm just having a look on Crunchbase, and so here's the history. They did a seed round in 2015, with 13 investors. A total of 7 million was raised, and then they raised 35 million in 2017. The number of investors, let's just have a look.
But it just changed its name, or have they?
No, no. I think your Burda isn't on the list of investors. So my guess is that it isn't the same entity you're talking about. Steve Vassallo and Cyan Bannister are both investors who are quite well known here in the Valley.
But I read the piece that you brought up, and it made it clear that this is built on top of technology developed by Clicks.
Okay. So maybe they acquired Clicks. That's possible.
Yeah. Anyway, it's good news, and it shows that there may be some opportunity for competition in search. Of course, Google are much stronger in Europe than they are in the US. They control more than 90% of the market. I know, Keith, you're still quite skeptical and critical of Vestager's attempt to take on Google when it comes to ad tech. What's the news this week on that?
Well, there was a story in the Financial Times, or the Times, I think it was the Financial Times, that made the point that Google's ad tech platform, which is a kind of a programmatic ad allocation engine, if you like, that sits behind the scenes, that Google unfairly favors itself on that platform by pricing others out of the market. That's at least one of the ways. It's very similar to the story last week where it was said that Apple puts its own apps on the iPhone and so favors its own apps when you buy an iPhone. So, let's just break it down. First,
hold on, wait. Let's just step back 1 minute on that. I'm not sure if it is entirely similar. There's a big difference there because Apple, when it comes to the app market, I don't know what percent of the app market is made up of the Apple, the iOS platform, but it's probably what, 20, 30% max.
Android is definitely globally bigger.
So just to be clear, there is a difference there. So just to be clear, Vestager wouldn't have gone after Apple because they can do whatever they like, as you would suggest, on the Apple platform, and they should be able to because they only control 20 or 30% of the market.
Well, wait. They control 20 or 30% of the devices, but that's 98% of the revenue. Because Android doesn't monetize very well.
Okay, but let's be clear, and I'm curious where you're coming from here. The antitrust law, and we've talked about this a lot in the past, doesn't make, in European antitrust law, does not make having a monopoly illegal. Do you accept that?
Yeah, same with the US. It's not illegal to be a monopoly.
So what is illegal is using monopoly power in one area to benefit another part of your business. So when it comes to Vestager taking on Google, in terms of them, in Vestager's eyes at least, manipulation of the ad tech market by promoting their ad tech software over others on the Google search, are you saying that the EU law is rotten, or are you saying that Vestager's interpretation of it is wrong?
Neither. I think the EU law is what it is, as you described it.
So it's accepting. It's just the law, for better or worse. We have to accept that's the reality.
It's the law, and the law, and the abuse of monopoly power has many different ways you can abuse it. Adjacency is one, but there's lots of others. The Microsoft DOJ case is a classic example of multiple abuses across many different.
And Microsoft clearly, I think the Microsoft case was based on the way in which Microsoft used its control of desktop of Windows to promote its internet browser.
Yeah. So look, antitrust law exists. We can have different opinions about how effective it is. I don't think it's very effective, but it exists. Secondly, it is about the abuse of monopoly power, not about being a monopoly. So that, therefore,
we're on the same page there.
So there's two requirements to be in the headlights, as it were. The first is being a monopoly, and the second is abusing your power as a monopoly. So then, when we look at Google, those are the two questions. In what sense is it a monopoly, and in what sense is it abusing its
power? Just to come back to one other thing, are you saying that you agree with Vestager's reading of the law or not?
As far as I can tell, his reading of the law,
the woman.
Sorry, her reading of the law is not on the record. What is on the record is her interpretation of when to apply it.
Okay.
So,
well, but still, you're splitting hairs here. I mean, you got to. I mean, this is coming through her office, so, and you're critical of it. So I assume there's something that she's doing you don't agree with.
Yeah, I don't agree that Google is a monopoly. Therefore, it couldn't possibly be abusing monopoly power.
So let's hone in on that. How and why is Google not a monopoly in the area that she says it is, which is in search?
Well, she can't say that it's a monopoly in search, because search is done on every single site on the internet. Search is done on Amazon. Search is done on every e-commerce site. Search is done everywhere. So it certainly isn't monopoly in search. Andrew, I apologize.
That is Vestager.
I have to take this call from my son. We'll do it live on air and our listeners can hear.
Okay, well, I hope it's nothing too personal.
Hey, Luke, I'm live on the internet right now answering your call. Could you call your mom? Oh, he didn't get through. He's at the movies, and I suspect his ticket doesn't work or something. Anyway, so I don't think it is a monopoly in search, although it's the biggest search engine.
And okay, so let me wear Vestager's, because I know Vestager. I spent some time with her when I interviewed her for my last book, How to Fix the Future. I spent some time in her office in Brussels. I'm guessing if she was on the show, she would respond to that by saying that search as a market still exists in Europe, in the sense that most Europeans, when they want to look something up on the internet, go to a search engine, and 90% of the time they go to a search engine, they go to Google, or they use the Google app. How would you respond to that?
I would show her traffic statistics that prove that isn't true. For example, the number of web searches as a percentage of user behavior has been declining for 10 years as mobile has grown and apps have taken over from the web browser as the primary thing people use. So most people search less than they ever did before. And so it's a declining, if it is a business at all, which I don't think it is, by the way, but if it was, it's a declining business. If you also look at Google's earnings, the cost per click that they get from putting ads in search has been in decline also for 10 years. Why? Because mobile doesn't monetize at as high a rate as the web used to do.
Okay, I accept the first point. I'd like to go back to that in a minute. But the second point is neither here nor there. The fact that it's less profitable doesn't make it any more or less of a monopoly.
Well, it means that money that used to go to Google is going somewhere else. And I can tell you where it's going.
That's another issue. But let's go back to your first point, because I think it is an interesting one and a credible one. I think probably you're pitching a legal job for Google, because you make their argument as well as they do. And indeed, you're right. Amazon now, in some ways, is a search company. Apple has always been a search company. Are you suggesting then that the very idea of a search engine in economic terms and in market terms is redundant?
It's not redundant, but the nearest Google got to being a monopoly was when they replaced Alta Vista as the main search engine back in 99, 2000, 2001. Since 2007, when the iPhone came out, it's been downhill for Google. Now, actually, because the internet's grown, Google's revenues have also grown, but as a proportion of internet revenues, they've shrunk.
So what you're saying, and I'm not necessarily disagreeing with this, is that Vestager is working off a previous generation understanding of the internet and of internet business. She's thinking Google around 2010 or 11, and in 2021, the internet's different, mobile's ubiquitous, and the idea of search has become so sort of both universal and fragmented that it no longer works to talk about it as a market.
Yeah, and to be fair, Google's biggest threat is actually itself, because its search isn't very good anymore.
Well, did you see that piece? I think I don't know if you put it in the newsletter. If you didn't, you should have. The New York Times piece, which is very critical of Google's leadership. A lot of senior execs talked to the New York Times people. I think it was Kevin Roos, about how the fact that their CEO is just too nice a guy, Pichai, and that he's not really a cutting edge CEO. So maybe there's some truth there too.
Yeah,
or maybe it's all a smokescreen to scare off Vestager.
I actually didn't put that article in, although it was an oversight. It wasn't on purpose, but that article was interesting because it also made the point that he's very devious and not liked internally.
But they say that they don't like him because they don't respect him because he's, I don't know whether he's too much of a nice guy or he wants to present himself as too much of a nice guy.
Right.
And I think what you raise is an important and interesting point. But maybe that's just the reality of things, is that regulation is always slow, even under someone like Linda Khan, who is about as quick and as innovative as any politician. And it's always working off previous business models.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if you were to try to put your finger on the pulse of what is important today for the next 10 years, Google is not one of them.
I agree. Who would you say? It's Amazon?
I think Amazon will always be important for a long time to come. I think Coinbase and other crypto things are very important. I think there's lots of cloud data intelligence and artificial intelligence stuff that's really important. And in most of those, Google is just not a player, or is a small player.
I agree. Although I've been writing the obituary of Google and Facebook for 10 years and it hasn't done me much good. So had I, instead of wasting my time criticizing them, bought Google and Facebook stock in 2011, I wouldn't need to be doing this. So maybe we're all wrong. One other point before we move on, Keith. I think shamefully we're not in as much disagreement as we think on this. The one thing I think I disagree with you on is and maybe you'll back off this, is your headline this week: regulation and free market, which works best? The reality is always it's both. It's never an either or. You've got to have both, don't you?
Well, it's a fact of life that you have both. So yes, that's definitely true. But what I'm really trying to get at with my headline, which is not one of my better headlines, I think, is if you were to take a policy decision about how to improve the consumer experience of the internet, would you think that competition throwing up alternatives and challenges to the incumbents will lead to a good outcome? Or would you think that regulation would be more likely to lead to a good outcome? And what I'm saying is, the mobile phone industry is a great example of this, as is the cable industry, that regulation typically has not produced good consumer outcomes.
I disagree, because I think actually by sort of disabling and distracting the cable companies, we had the rise of the internet. The same is true of Microsoft. I mean, the cable companies and the cell companies, they're pathetic. But one of the reasons they're pathetic is because of regulation. And the same is true of Microsoft. I mean, had you not had, let me just ask this final question and then we'll move on. And this was a period you know a lot about. Isn't it fair to say that had there not been the aggressive regulation of Google in the late 90s, which may not have resulted in that much, but certainly took their attention off their main game?
You mean Microsoft?
Would not have had the explosion of Web 2.0 economy.
You said Google, but you meant Microsoft.
Oh, sorry, I meant Microsoft.
So I'm kind of on the record as being an opponent of the DOJ at that time. And by the way, I was a victim of Microsoft.
Right, but take out all your personal stuff.
Yeah.
You were sort of involved
So
in.
here's what I think. I think Microsoft built the dominant position in operating systems. At that time, Apple and Unix were just nothing. And, the Internet Explorer browser had a 99% global market share. And Microsoft was leveraging its operating system and Windows and Office to build in all the features of every successful app underneath and then kill the companies.
Yeah.
So,
basically, they wanted to turn the internet into just another version of Windows, right?
yeah, a little bit like Facebook wants to turn the internet into Facebook, but failing.
Which is what any company naturally wants to do, in the way that Google wants to turn the internet into a big version of the Google search engine.
Right. So, but then I think you have to separate emotion from fact. You've got to say, okay, did Microsoft do anything illegal? In their case, the answer was clearly yes. They did all kinds of negotiating tactics, which were pretty much blackmail, and they did. Is Facebook doing anything illegal today? Well, not that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
But,
I think the thing with Facebook is everyone hates Facebook and Zuckerberg and what they've done, but it's hard to make a case for them in antitrust. I don't know how anyone would do that.
But that said, Microsoft really got killed. Even if you give a lot of credit to the antitrust, what really killed Microsoft was they had a blind spot for the internet initially, then they had a blind spot for mobile, and then they had a blind spot for the cloud. So they missed 3 massive waves of tech. Now, to be fair, they've caught up. Microsoft Cloud is now very good.
Yeah.
They've abandoned mobile and gone for putting their apps onto Android and iPhone. So they survive without having a mobile play. And, I think that Windows, with the help of NVIDIA, is making a bit of a comeback, actually.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we necessarily disagree. So the answer is both regulation and free markets. Rather than looking back, Keith, let's look forward to a post-COVID economy. You and I in California are slowly emerging out of this COVID catastrophe that we've been going through for the last 18 months. Are we going back to work? Are we going back to the office? Not that you and I have jobs. If we had jobs, would we be going back to the office?
Well, this is a story from VMware. It's actually quite funny. I could walk to VMware's office from here.
Are you pitching them for a job?
I am not. I am basically unemployable, Andrew, as you know.
Less unemployable than me, though.
I have to employ myself. That's the only way it works.
Me too.
So basically, they have a big office. It's a whole campus. They opened it up, and only 99 employees showed up out of 5,000.
Surprise, surprise.
So what does this tell us? It tells us that enterprises are going to have to get used to the fact that the operating system for their business should assume a very big percentage of employees are still remote, even post-COVID.
Is it a big deal, though? I mean, you and I have been working from home for years. So what?
I think in the enterprise world, there's a fear factor of loss of control and execution ability. They don't trust their employees and teams. It's a top-down culture many times. And so if you can't see someone, you assume that they're, in English, skiving. So I suspect it's about enterprise culture more than how practical it would be to be remote. I think it's very practical to be remote, actually.
Well, we don't have a Clubhouse story this week, which is a first, but we do have a story about creators as the new startups, which has been a theme we've talked about a lot. What's happened this week to make it particularly relevant?
So this is an interview with Hunter Walk, who runs a venture firm called Homebrew. Hunter's background is he used to run YouTube back in the early days.
Yeah, ex-Google.
Yeah, very thoughtful guy. And
I know his wife. I can't remember how, but I do.
So he basically makes the point that $2 billion has now been invested in what's known as the creator economy startup scene. And that's a big number, clearly. It's probably close to 1% of all venture capital in the last year. And there's lots of well-known brands. Twitter, by the way, this week announced that on Spaces, you can do a Clubhouse-style meeting and sell tickets now. So they're starting
we should do that. Is anyone going to pay to watch us argue about antitrust?
No. If we made them, we'd be shooting ourselves in the foot. They barely watch us even when it's free.
I think even if we paid people, they wouldn't want.
So there's the Twitter story. So, I think this, I had a call this morning with the CFO of Infarm, and he told me that his wife has been taking books like Frida Kahlo's biography, and she's been making video education for children about the books and building quite an audience, 15-minute videos on topics that are part of...
Yeah, what's that company? There was a company that's just got a $20 million investment focusing on books and as a platform for marketing authors.
I can't remember the name, but that's the creator economy. The creator economy is the tools are now there to serve up content and product to large audiences, pretty much for free. And if you have valuable content that people will pay for, you can do very well.
I have to say that I was a little depressed with the Walk interview, not because I disagree with him or dislike him, but because I'm not sure he's talking about a creator economy. He's talking about a celebrity economy. And what he's saying is there are opportunities for all these people with millions of followers for one reason or other to using an old-fashioned word, monetize their brand, which I'm sure is true, but I'm not sure what that's got to do with being creative.
Yeah, hopefully those people are already creative and they already make money. So
well, they're creative because they wear a certain kind of sneaker or because they open a certain kind of product on YouTube. I guess they're creative, but in a very new generational sense.
Yeah, well, that now you're kind of moving from creators to influencers, and influencers do tend to have a reduced down message that somehow or other carries weight. Like I know my kids will watch various rap fans or gamers, but it's not because of them; it's because of what they represent.
Yeah.
So that is a new creator in a sense. But I want to take your point on board. I think you're right. Marc Andreessen makes the opposite point. He says that if you have 1,000 people that will pay you $100 a year, you can live. And quite a lot of people could find 1,000 people that would pay them $100 a year, probably more than 1,000 that would pay them $100 a year. So that is new. Because previously it would have been hard to deliver to those 1,000 people something worth paying for, but now it isn't so hard.
Well, the thing with Andreessen, though, is his own interest in the economy disproves that, because he's channeling all his enormous wealth into channels for platforms to distribute his own message.
Yeah,
in opposition, in contrast with mainstream media.
Yeah, Future is the name of his new media platform. And by the way, this week they announced $2.2 billion in their third crypto fund. So they're
right. So shifting over from creators, influencers, celebrities to crypto. Crypto continues to explode in a very energetic, positive sense, right, Keith?
Crypto and venture capital and startups in general. I struggled to find a title this week for this section, but it's all about people making money. 4 IPOs on Thursday. The need to get your unit economics right, which means making a profit. This is Samir Kaji talking about why venture capital needs to be disrupted, which I agree with, and more access to startups.
Well, you're disrupting VC. You're one of the disruptors of the VC and you've talked. There's a link to an article in The Economist about Tiger Global, who you say are one of the major disruptors too.
Yep. This is another IPO of a venture fund in the UK. So that's the third in 3 weeks that I'm doing a publicly listed venture fund. Andreessen's crypto fund, PayPal and Visa investing in Blockchain Capital's fund for crypto investing. and Andreessen hiring
So
a
what's going
golden.
on there with blockchain, with companies like Visa and PayPal?
Well,
Are they frenemies when it comes to the credit card companies and the fintech companies? And who are they trying to compete with now?
they are trying to own a piece of the next phase of evolution of money. And so they're partly in learning mode, partly leaning in, and partly protecting their own historical businesses, which don't have anything to do with crypto. So they're doing multiple things at the same time. But I think that the future signal is the leaning in and investing piece, because they're trying to figure out how to play an asset class that they have no history in being part of.
But it's an asset class rather than a currency.
uh, Asset class is right, because there's many different types of crypto. Some of them try to be a currency, others don't. There's many different purposes. So asset class, yeah.
I talked to a unnamed, fairly senior figure who used to work at the Bank of England, now a very senior lawyer, and she was telling me that she still doesn't believe that the central banks, and she has good experience of the Bank of England, will ever give up their power when it comes to crypto. So she's still not bullish on crypto as a currency versus an asset class. And I'm still not entirely clear what the difference is and whether crypto can still win even if it doesn't become a currency.
Well, she's exactly right. That's why I always frame this discussion as globalization versus nation states. Taking Bitcoin just for example, it clearly is not accountable to any single nation state. It may be accountable to all of them in different ways through regulation, but it's kind of an overlay on top of the financial system. And national banks will certainly not embrace that any more than the British Telecom embraced the internet initially. It was their replacement, so they try to kill it, slow it down, understand it, but not help it grow. And so I think that she's exactly right. I personally think that nation states are a far more important focus for critique than companies. If you're trying to ask the question, what individual citizens need of the future, I think nation states are a far greater threat to us than companies are. And so I agree with her, not because I like it, but it's just a fact of life that nation states will not give up their power.
I suspect also that, we really haven't had a revolutionary company since, Facebook? A profoundly revolutionary company. And I suspect that the next one will be something like that search engine we talked about at the beginning that somehow combines attention and crypto in ways that will seem obvious but don't seem obvious to us now.
I think that's right. I call that the unborn child. It's there is an embryo that has some elements of life that has yet to be born, but when it is born, it will be the best form of life we have yet seen.
And how did Naomi Osaka find her way into the newsletter? A tennis player of all things, Keith.
You're going to have to remind me where she was, because I don't remember.
She's in the global.
Oh yeah. Now I remember. Sorry, I'm not good with names, but I'm good with topics. This is it. Well, we talked, I think, about 3 weeks ago about the G7 agreeing to tax big tech globally for any profits above 10% get taxed at 15% globally by the country that the money was made in. So she is talking about whether that is smart, and she comes out against the idea that it's smart, by the way, in the Harvard review. It's a long piece, well thought out, and from a surprising source. So I just thought, given that we've already talked about it, we should.
Well, she's got time on her hands because she She withdrew from the French Open because she didn't like the media attention. So finally, startup of the week, another small little startup you've got your eyes on this week, Keith.
Yeah, startup of the week is Windows or Microsoft. Just because Windows 11, they actually did a good job yesterday. I'm not selling my Mac anytime soon, but they did a very good job of presenting Windows 11 as a modern future operating system, taking on many of the things that people criticize Apple for directly. And it was fairly bold and brave. So I think it is a startup because Windows is not something any of us think of in a good way. But maybe that's about to change.
Does anyone still use Windows?
Exactly. Yes, they do actually, but not anyone cool.
Corporate types, which perhaps one of the long-term implications of post-COVID and people working more from home will be the end of Windows-like systems for corporate use. And everyone now, because I mean, everyone we know uses Apple because no one's told them what to use. The only reason anyone ever uses Microsoft is because they're told they have to use them.
Correct.
Finally, Keith, you have managed to somehow smuggle back your biggest hero into the show. How did you do that for Tweet of the Week?
Well, Paul Graham tweeted today, actually, June 25th. There it is. Today is our 5th anniversary of moving back to England, though we didn't know at first that we were. So, surprise of surprises, Paul Graham is British and has been living in England for the last 5 years.
Maybe that's another Paul Graham. Is that the real Paul Graham?
It's the real Paul Graham. So
I know he's an avid watcher of the show.
So I think we have to embrace him as a fellow countryman and be pleased for his presence.
I'm guessing he's an Arsenal fan, or he's certainly an anorak. But does that also suggest, again, the globalization of investment and your idea that the nation state is finished when it comes to real economics, the truth about economic activity and investment?
Well, yeah, I think it does, but it's not finished. It's increasingly irrelevant and therefore highly irritated and therefore an activist. Nation states are becoming activists against globalization. So they're far from finished. And if you really want a future where we don't wear labels with flags on, but we're all part of the human race, we should be against their activism.
I think you should be more sympathetic to Margaret Vestager. She's certainly not a supporter of the nation state. Supranational Margaret. That was the week for June the 25th. Rather boring. Keith and I agreed on antitrust, which is a first. We'll have to find some things to disagree on next week. Keith, have a wonderful week, and we will see you again in 7 days. Keep well, everyone, and that was fun. Thank you.
Bye-bye.